And I think to me, it took a long time to understand why EQ was important when, I was so smart at solving problems. I was an IIT guy, so when I got my jobs, etc., I would go ahead and be the smartest engineer. I would come up with the smartest solutions. I would do the software and hardware implementation or system debugging smarter and better and quicker than everybody else. Uh, and yet, at the end of the year, when it came to bonus time and promotion time, guess what? I did not get the highest bonuses. I did not get the promotion to the manager. In fact, somebody who was much more average would be promoted to be my manager. And this happened over and over and over again. Uh, and it's only then, after a long time, I started learning about the fact that you need to have interpersonal skills, team management skills, leadership skills, relationship building skills, and all of these skills were necessary. And then, my success, took off exponentially, because you match high EQ with high IQ, there's nothing to stop you. You're going to go, sky's the limit, right? So that's why I felt that, it's very important to understand what this EQ is all about. Because most of us, don't think that it can be just intuitive. It can just be something that we're all born with, that our society is going to put into us, and it does that. But it's not thoroughly. It's not done completely right. Now, uh, the profession within the company that seems to get the highest compensation are salespeople. And one thing you will see is that these salespeople can get, and at least I've got, at least in my organizations, whichever startups I've done, 2x, 3x, 4x the compensation of the CEO, right? So at Selectica, I was making about 250K per year. I would have at least 2 or 3 salespeople who would make $1 million check per year. And this was 20 years ago, when $1 million was worth a lot of money. So the reason is, and most of these salespeople were, bachelors in arts, or even a college dropout, right? So these were people who were making $1 million a year at the age of 27, 28, 29. And I was happy to sign those checks, guys. I was very happy to sign those checks, because because what these salespeople did, or the service they provided the company, was something that, without it, the company would not even be successful or survive. So, I reached out to the top salesman at Selectica, and, he's got a long 30, 40-year career already. And I said, Rob, I reached him after about 18 years, just because he was a Facebook friend, I could reach him. And I said, Rob, I'm teaching this sales course, and I need to show these students what a salesman looks like. How does he speak? How does he communicate? What is so special about this person that makes him successful, right? So I'd invited Rob Mills to give a talk to our entrepreneurship class, and it's a 24-minute video, and we will see it. And I see Dr. Teja Patil is here too. Thank you very much for waking up early for us. And after that, Teja, if you can teach the course, teach your entrepreneurship, emotional quotient intelligence, that'll be great. Okay, so let's get started.
Start. in sales. They're terrible. Or at best, they're just average and they're satisfied with being average. Now, most companies do not want to keep average salespeople around. They want superstars. They want people that can go out and make things happen. And that's how you get your company from nothing to multi-billion-dollar status. And there's no other way to do it except have good execution on the sales side. So why is it that some people really suck at this and a few people are really good at this? And one of the assessments that I've thought about over the years is that if you're bad at this, it's because you are letting your ego get in the way of your wallet. And you get in your own way. So what does it take to be a great salesperson? We're going to cover that in just a minute. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. And let me start out by saying, again, Rush, thanks for having me to talk to your students. This is quite an honor for me. And Raj has been a boss, a business mentor, but more importantly, a friend of mine for 22 years now. So we've got a lot of history together. So a little bit of background on me, very briefly. Been in the high-tech business since the early 80s. So do the math, you can figure out how old I am. I interviewed with Raj at Selectica when there was 26 folks. And this was back in the end of September, beginning of October in 1998. So it's been quite a while. And I was excited about the opportunity that he laid out and some other people that were there laid out for me. And I told Raj right there, if you will hire me, I will not let you down. So principle one, go into an opportunity with the right attitude and with the right upfront expectation for the person that you're talking with. So fast forward, let me give you a couple of other tidbits. So let's examine, since I don't have much time, I'm gonna rush through this pretty quickly, and hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end for some questions. So we asked the question, what does it take to be a good salesperson? And the answer is, if you're just a good salesperson, you suck. You're average. You want to be a great salesperson. You want to be a professional. The only way that you can become a pro doing this crazy world of sales is if you model a pro. So it's just like anything else that you really want to get good at. You have to find somebody that can mentor you and somebody that's done it and been there. I mean, one of the first things I do when I hire salespeople is say, look, show me your W-2. Show me how much money you've made. You put your money where your mouth is, because everybody talks a big game, right? But at the end of the day, I want to see the scoreboard. And so those are the people that I'm most interested in working with for a number of reasons. I'm not going to get into all those reasons. But what does it actually take to be a professional grade salesperson? One is, and these are in no particular order, but I was kind of thinking through some bullet points. One is you have to be a great storyteller, because people don't want to be salesy to death or slided to death with slides. They want to get right to the point. So one of the things that you need to be able to do is to build intrigue and then resolve that intrigue. Think about a good novel writer, especially one that's maybe like a Grisham, that's talking about legal aspects, and he builds all these intrigues into a story, and he gets you on the edge of your seat, and you want to know more. So when you have a meeting with a prospect, your goal for that meeting is you want them to hear more. You want another meeting. You want a deeper dive. You want to build more value. You're building the intrigue. But you can't do that forever. That intrigue has to be resolved at some point. That resolve is where we take everything that we've told them up to that point, and we show them and share with them how the value is going to affect them personally. Here's one thing that we've discovered over the years in sales is it does not matter if you're selling gas turbines or rubber bands or software or whatever. It's still an emotional buy. Here's why. It's an emotional buy because that person that's buying from you and that team of people all have this thing called what's in it for me. What they're buying could affect their career. It could affect how they're seen by their peers. It could affect how they're seen by their boss. So if you make this about them and not you, then you'll have a much better success rate, but you'll keep their. You won't sound like every other salesperson that's walking through the door. A little bit more on intrigue, give you an example. So you may say something like, if you don't take action on this until the end of the year, it's going to cost you $1 million or whatever it is. Immediately followed up by resolving the intrigue. I'm not going to let that happen to you. We're going to work together. We're not giving them an option. We're going to work together on putting a plan together that eliminates those costs now and makes you look like a hero. Now, you see how that intrigue was built? We caused the problem, and then we answered the problem with value that was personalized back to that person. That's what they buy. So one of the things that's been hard to get across to salespeople over the years, and the ones that get it really know how to go out and sell it, and that is people don't actually buy your product. They don't buy your software. They don't buy your gas turbine. They don't buy your whatever. What they buy is the end result. If a rubber band would cure everything, they'd buy a box of rubber bands. So it's the end result that they are actually buying, and that's where the value comes from that. So what are some of the other things that you need to be a great salesperson? Integrity. Some salespeople are too salesy, and they come across disingenuine, and they want their words to flow, and they want to be this great presenter, and I care less about that stuff. All I care about is getting the message across in the way that the person understands it and wants to pay you for it. At the end of the day, that's all that's important. And we're not going to ask them to pay for it or make a decision until we've given them, in my opinion, 10x the value that they're paying for it. Once I've determined that they're getting that, and the responsibility to ask them for the order and to pay for something. And in return, they're going to get a lot of things. Now, along with that, you must be very direct. You can't be vague when you're building value. And everything, that's why you have to do your homework. So I see so many salespeople that wing it and don't prepare properly when they go into a sales talk or a sales meeting. And if I take that even a step further, it's an attitude. It's something that I walk in with, and that is a feeling. Because this is all about feelings. I don't care what you're selling. You must care more about your customer than the commission check. If you will do that, the commission check will take care of itself. And I've gotten some very, very big ones signed by this man. So it's been a lot of fun, but you gotta do it right. So I always walk in with an attitude of, we are going to build a long-term relationship together. So to Raj's point on IBM, we started that sales campaign back in the end of '99. And to this day, all the executives, all of my champions inside of IBM, we still talk every quarter at least. We are still friends. We follow each other on Facebook. We kid each other. So these are the long-term relationships that I'm talking about. And if you come in with that attitude, and not this just disingenuous salesy type attitude, it will make a huge, huge difference. So build long-term relationships. So, and remember, they always are wondering, and I'm not going to say this, but what's in it for me, or what's in it for them? And so you must build value for them personally. This builds trust automatically. You don't have to build something separately called trust, because it's there inherently. So let me give you another example. I'm going to brag on Raj a little bit about integrity. So back when Selectica was 30 folks, and I think we'd grown, I don't know, 40 to 50 at this time, I had a very serious motorcycle accident. And I was in the hospital paralyzed and was in literally for months. Now, Selectica at the time did not have any long-term or short-term disability insurance. And I had just moved into a new house. All my kids were toddlers, and I was in bad shape. So Raj and the board decided that they would continue to pay me, and they would continue to take care of me throughout my hospital stay and my rehabilitation. My rehabilitation took almost 6 months. But that integrity, and because he was willing to do that, the company was willing to do that, everybody was cheering for me. The loyalty that built, and this happens with your customers too, the loyalty to that built, I think paid off pretty well, Raj. What do you think? So, and it's those things that build lifetime friendships, and people never forget that. If you take that same attitude with your customer, it's really a good thing. So another thing that you must have to be a true pro salesperson is you got to be courageous. There are no timid sales superstars, none. So you got to be able to ask the tough questions. You got to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, hey, here's what I think. I think that you're wrong. Now, you got to be very careful how you do that. You're leading somebody to a conclusion. And a lot of times in the sales situation, they don't know what they don't know. You're the expert. You're the one that can come in and say, done the right way, look, you may want to look at this a little bit differently because I have a different opinion on this based on this and this and this experience. And it's that experience that gives them the confidence to move forward. Otherwise, it sends up all kinds of yellow and red flags for them. The other thing that you have to be is tenacious. If you even think of giving up, you already lost. You're done. Because mentally, the customer can feel that. They know it. Let me give you an example. I could have given up lying in that hospital paralyzed and not being able to walk and all that stuff. And even some of the doctors said, look, you're going to be really lucky if you walk out of here. So luck has nothing to do with it. I am walking out of here. And that's just that. The decision was already made. It just had to catch up with me 6 months later. Okay. Same thing in sales. Let's talk about IBM. So IBM got started. Here's how we did it. Got to be really creative. It's another key word in this business, the sales business. We had just closed Dell Computer. And I was working with my telemarketer, Kerry Maltzman. And I said, look, you and I are going to craft an email. And it's going to go to the equivalent guy for Dell over at IBM. And so that's what we did. We said, hey, Dell just did this. You might be interested too. Obviously, we were using a little competitive, bantering back and forth between IBM and Dell at the time. And I got a call back the very next day. So you got to be creative, you got to be tenacious, you got to figure out ways to get in. So we went through this sales cycle for a year with IBM. And we got to a point where we had $1 million deal. I don't know if you remember this, but we actually had that deal signed on December 31st. Was the last day of the year, last day of the quarter, all of that sort of thing. And 3 hours later, this is the hard lesson that I learned, and it took me years to learn this, but I learned it on that day. 3 hours later, they called back. The legal department called me, and they reneged on the deal, and it was already signed. So until money is exchanged, I don't care how good you think the deal is going. It can go away just like that. We never knew why. So 6 months later, I found out why. The guy that ran the sales ops organization, 5,000 people in his organization at IBM, his name was Herb Hunt. And we couldn't figure out, even our internal champions were like, we have no idea what happened. It sucks, but it happened. So what? 6 months later, we found out that Herb Hunt went over to become the CIO of Siebel. So he was in Tom Siebel's pocket the entire time. He nixed the deal. As a result of that, he became CIO of Siebel Systems. Brought in a new guy, Vince Ostrowski. We started the whole process over again. It took another 24 months. And then we walked out of there with a software deal of 12, 13 million. Another 2 million 2 years later. We were billing $2 million a quarter in services, $2 million a year in maintenance, and we ended up taking $56 million out of IBM. Now, what did that take? It took a lot of patience because here it is. We had this deal done. But if we had done that deal, here's another thing to think about. If we'd have done that deal, we might not have taken $56 million out of IBM. So things happen if you keep at them and stay tenacious, stay hungry, stay courageous. Make sure that you are making all your internal champions long-term relationships and friends. Then nice things can happen for you. Now, does it happen every time? No, it doesn't have to happen every time, but it happens sometimes. And that's enough. So one thing I wanted to share with you also is why people buy. And one of the reasons people buy is something that I call transference of feelings. If I can get you to feel the way that I feel, then you will respond and act the way that I do. So if I really, really, really believe that my product or my service or what we can offer you that 10x value, and I can give you that feeling because I feel it, that's called a transference of feelings. That's what causes people to take action instead of sit around doing nothing. So just remember, you are selling to people, and remember that they're not buying your product, they're buying the end result. And don't let your ego get in the way of your wallet. So, Raj, that's a quick summary. Maybe if anybody has any questions, I could answer some questions for a few minutes. But you tell me, how much time do I have?
I think if you have the time, I think the students have the time.
I'm all yours, Raj.
Because I can tell you, Rob, that after listening to you again for 20 minutes, I know why you're a great salesman. What I would say that I think I've told the class many times, I think you're the best salesman that I've had an opportunity to work with, over 25 years.
Well, thank you.
Right. So
thank you. And I can do it in a t-shirt.
So the reason is that Rob, we can all learn the PPTs about how to sell and so on, but you make made them come to life in a very, very subtle way. And you brought elements of why it takes time to become a sales guy, a very good, world-class sales guy. It takes time to develop the personality of selling. It's got to be a natural, right? You have to, it has to come off naturally. And the fact that about how do you get the customer hooked using intrigue and with a solution, the importance of tenacity, the importance of integrity, the importance of you in your heart feeling the 10x value that the customer is going to get, so that this transference of feeling happens. I think, that is, it's not acting. You can't act it. You got to be genuine about it, right?
They'll see right through that.
Yeah, they'll see right through it. It's the genuineness of all these things that when they come together in a person, now you take somebody who can basically be a good, promoter of the product, to somebody who can become, the partner or for the customer, right? The sales partner for the customer. And that's what I got. Again, I'm seeing you probably after, I would say 2002 was the last time I saw you. So you haven't aged one bit. Maybe because you're wearing a hat. Is your hair all white now?
So... No. You don't want to see what's under this hat. That's for sure.
Okay. Anyway, so I'm seeing after 18 years, and I think you're just, but are you still selling?
Yeah, I actually work for Google.
Oh my God! And how long have you been working there?
Just a short period of time. They brought me in to work with all they get these sales team for the cloud called CAS. They're basically global account managers that are like, the big ones. And so they're trying to get their cloud products sold into those giant customers. And my job is to assist them with the business intelligence. I'm a business intelligence kind of analyst and advisor. So I assist all those big global reps on how to do what we're talking about, because they've not been an enterprise sales organization primarily. They've sold ads in the ad space and that sort of thing. Now that they've got into the cloud, it's a whole new animal for them. So they brought me in. I'm probably one of the oldest guys that they've hired at Google, and I'm working with all these 22-year-olds, and it's awesome. It's great. No, I think they thoroughly benefit from, what you bring to them. I mean, there is very few people who have had the kind of sales experience and success that you've had, and the fact that Google recognized that, I'm really impressed that Google actually got an opportunity. I got the Google thing. I got my own consultancy. I've got 4 clients. One of them is a CPQ client. I sit on 2 boards. So I'm doing a lot of interesting things that interest me now. It's not, it doesn't have to be all about money now. So I do things that are fun and like this is one. Okay, so we will stop that presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to Teja, Dr. Patil, and so Teja, just go ahead and give the students an understanding of EQ.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Is that visible?
Yes.
Great. Let me just get my second camera set up very quickly. Perfect. Okay, well, good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Patil. I was born in Pune, but I was raised in the Silicon Valley. And, both of my parents are entrepreneurs, but I am not. I actually decided to pursue the field of medicine. So I'm an internal medicine physician. I teach at Stanford University through their School of Medicine and their internal medicine residents. And for the last 5 years, I've been teaching their resiliency curriculum along with one of my partners. 2 years ago, we started our own small venture called Resilience in Healthcare, where we basically teach resiliency, emotional intelligence skills to physicians. And I'm very happy to be invited back again to do this talk. So thank you very much for having me. All right, let's get started. You'll see my eyes flicking back and forth because I'm going between two screens. All right. So today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and we have less than an hour together. So you will not be surprised to hear me say that I cannot teach you emotional intelligence in an hour. But we will talk about a mini lesson, which I like to call the psychology of survival. And I think this is something that we should have all learned in primary school, and I don't know why we didn't. In the first part of the class today, we heard a talk specifically about salesmanship and what it takes to be a great salesman. I'm going to teach this material through a little bit of a different filter, but I'll say that the thread that connects the two is that at the end of the day, it's the understanding that success is derived from relationships. And that really is, I think, what connects this idea of the EQ class today. All right, so let's go. All right, so the first thing which Raj actually alluded to in the very beginning, half an hour ago, is this idea that everybody's ability is simply a product of IQ times EQ. So you're sitting at home or in class right now, and I'd like for you to do a little exercise with me. If you were to rate yourself. And you can put your hand up so it's visible, or you can do it, just privately if you're shy. But I'd like you to ask for yourself, do you feel that you're in the top 50% of IQ? And you can keep your hand up if you think you're in the top 30%, top 20% of IQ in the world, and top 10%. All right. Okay. Same question for you. How about emotional intelligence? Put your hand up if you think you're in the top 50%, and keep it up if you think you're in the top 30, the top 20, and the top 10%. Okay. So I think for most people, the question comes up of how are we defining IQ and EQ? And IQ, I think a lot of us can come to a shared definition much more easily because we've heard of this and we know that there are supposedly objective measures of IQ, right? There's tests we can take. And so when people think of intelligence quotient, they think book smarts, like, do you have a master's? Do you have a PhD? What are your test scores? What is your GPA? IQ is a little bit harder to define. And, when I first started thinking about this, I in fact was like, what is this? Like, does it mean that you're really good at being a friendly person? Is it what we heard about a little bit earlier about being able to show up like authentically and be yourself, not pretend, not play a role? Are you good at being sympathetic to other people? Does it just mean that you're like pleasant to work with? So I'll propose a definition here that I really have found useful in my work because it's so simple, which means I can remember it. Okay, so IQ is the ability to solve problems that don't involve people. These are technical problems. EQ is the ability to solve problems that involve people. And I'll take it down one level further for EQ. EQ about yourself is called self-awareness. EQ about others is a core leadership skill. And you cannot have it. You cannot get it. You cannot be a great leader without EQ. And I think that the fascinating thing to me, teaching at the Stanford School of Medicine, this is the top 5, school in the US, the top 5 medicine program. And it's incredible because it's very obvious to me that skills that come with EQ are not taught explicitly in traditional education, especially not in technical fields. Okay. So let's go back to this idea of ability being EQ times IQ. So when we think about EQ, EQ is not innate, okay? And I've found through working with my students for the last 5 years that just like learning anything else, calculus, cricket, how to become a better writer, you can learn essential frameworks and you can actually practice capacities that build EQ and increase your ability. And as an entrepreneur, expanding EQ can be a lifelong and essential goal. All right. I'll talk a little bit about what I do with resilience in healthcare and with our curriculum, just to give you an idea. Now, I teach this through the frame of physicianship, of, being a doctor or a healer. But I think a lot of these themes can relate very easily into the world of entrepreneurship. So what we teach is an explicit EQ curriculum for physicians. That's our mission, is to make what is implicit and what is a hidden curriculum into explicit skills that we know these students can master. And the curriculum is broken up into a couple of different parts. So the first part is ourselves. It's raising self-awareness. And we teach things about the science or anatomy of an emotion and how we can consciously manage our emotions. We teach how to track and regulate stress states, how to manage self-judgment. So how to think about mistakes and tendencies towards perfectionism and how they actually end up leading to self-limiting beliefs, and building a self-reflective practice so we can continue to improve over the years. Then we also talk about our relationship to others, teaching about a conscious approach to conflict, healthy professional boundaries, how to de-escalate situations, how to communicate a vision, how to motivate others and be convincing to them. So I'd like for you to, just consider while we're here this morning, what lessons from the EQ world do you think would be central to your future success as an entrepreneur? And I'm hoping that I've planted a seed here of just curiosity, because I suspect that many of you have a wealth of information and a wealth of degrees and educational and even work experience. And I think that in today's world, especially where we're so tied to metrics and data, it can be easy for that to overshadow some of these what used to be called soft skills, but I'll tell you that these skills are harder than the technical skills to get great at. So I no longer call them soft skills. I'll stop there because I'm going to make a pivot now, since we have limited time together. That was just my soapbox, cry to you for why EQ is so important to your future success. If anybody has any questions, I'll invite them now, or comments. Otherwise, we can get started. All right.
Teja, are there different EQ skills at different stages of the career of a person?
Okay.
Somebody who's just graduated from IIT, will he need one kind of EQ skills? And somebody who's like now 10, 20 years, he's the boss, will he have different EQ skills?
Yes. So that's a great question. So, I will share with you a I shouldn't call it a curriculum, but I will share with you, and you can share it with the class afterwards, this pyramid that we have devised that we propose to programs all over the country for how to do this for students of medicine. Okay, and again, I really think that this can apply. And it basically, the skills build on themselves. So in fact, the basic skills that we have students start with are actually things like mindfulness practices. It's actually things like foundational practices like meditation, journaling, which you might be surprised to hear, are actually like the basic building blocks of building self-awareness,
Uh-huh.
increasing
Okay.
our consciousness and self-control. And then we level up those skills by starting to teach about, some of the more like neurobiology that's involved, which we'll talk about today. And then we take that up a level to talking about relationships, managing conflict, motivating people. And it goes on and on like that. Is there a question in the chat? Why the EQs of bosses, in my case, generally drop as industrial experience and hierarchy increases. I love that. Okay, so I don't know specifically in your world why this is happening, but one thing that may be happening here is, have you guys heard of this thing called the Peter Principle? It's this idea that, sometimes individual contributors that are really good at their work are the ones who keep getting promoted. But just because you get promoted, so let's say like you're an amazing engineer, and just because of seniority and how good engineer you are, you keep getting promoted to managing positions. But in fact, like what you were really good at is being an individual contributor. This is kind of like a simple explanation for why sometimes people who end up in great managing positions were not actually explicitly taught how to be good managers. Raj or Ramesh, do you want to add to that? All right. Okay, well then let's get into the second part. Okay, so we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the psychology of survival. Okay. All right. So I have a picture here of the Serengeti, and I want to take you back millennia, many millennia, to the time where our brains were still evolving. Okay. So as we evolved, you guys know that our brains were wired for survival. And a central way that our brains developed in order to get us to survive is that we became wired to sense threats to our survival. Our brain became extremely good at integrating multiple inputs very rapidly. Okay, and by multiple inputs, I mean, of course, the five senses: visual, auditory, sensate, smell, taste, but also input within us. Okay, our bodies are able to sense like how fast is my heart beating? Is my bladder full? Is my stomach empty? Am I dehydrated? What is my sodium level? All of this input is constantly being scanned by what often is called the lizard brain or our brainstem. Okay, this is sort of the gray part in the photo of the picture here. The lizard brain has had so much time to evolve over the millennia that it has become extremely fast. So while it takes our prefrontal cortex, the blue part in the picture here, about 500 milliseconds to create a thought, the lizard brain can react in 40 milliseconds, okay, more than 10 times faster. And, over the millennia, we built up this rapid fire system as a way not just to sense threat and be aware of it, but also to respond to it just as rapidly. Okay. The responses that happen from our lizard brain, like from this like very rapid system, are deeply ingrained in us. But They tend not to be well thought out. They're not proportional. They're usually not wise, and they're not carefully considered. This is the opposite of a carefully considered response. Okay, these are reflexes. And so we're going to talk today about, okay, all of us have these reflexes wired into our brainstem, hardwired conditioning. So what are these responses to threat? All right, so there's 4 classic evolutionary responses to threat. I'm sure everybody here has heard of fight or flight, and you may have even heard of freeze and please. Okay, let's go through what these look like in nature a millennia ago. Okay, fight, you know what that looks like. Here's 2 tigers fighting to the death, possibly in a zoo. The second one is flight, literally running away. Okay, the gazelle sees the cheetah, knows that it does not have claws and teeth to fight it, so literally speeds away, tries to leave the scene. Freeze. Okay, this is a more interesting one. So you may have noticed, for example, sometimes you'll see a squirrel, and when it's frightened, it'll suddenly it'll almost become a statue, hoping that its lack of motion will mean that the predator can no longer see it. Okay, so that's the freeze response to threat. And the final one is please or submit. You may have seen this, especially in dogs, where, you know, when 2 dogs meet, one dog will sometimes immediately fall on its back and show its stomach. And that's a very visual way of showing, I'm not a threat to you. You don't have to hurt me because I'm not trying to fight you. Okay. So these, all 4 of these have evolved in the animal kingdom as well as us. So what's the problem with it? Today's threats are existential. Very few of us, and especially if you're in this class, I know that you're not living in the Serengeti, surrounded by cheetahs and lions or tigers. So our environment has evolved, but the question is, what about our brains? And the short answer is, our brains have not yet evolved to match the environment that we live in. Okay, so what this means is that our body still experiences stress and threat in the modern world as it was conditioned to respond to it in the old world. And so, you know, I love that phrase, the corporate jungle, because I don't think people realize like how accurate that actually is. Like our experience is still that we are living and surviving in a jungle. So here's the question that we're going to work through today, okay? Survival instincts, do they still serve you? And what do they look like in the modern world? Because, yeah, I mean, sure, maybe we've seen people fighting in the modern world physically, but when you're in the corporate space, most people are not slapping each other or throwing punches. But let me tell you, these reactions are still existing in our workplace today. So we're going to talk a little bit about what do they look like now. And, you know, I just want us all to recognize that all of us, 100% of us, engage in these unconscious reactions to threat. But by learning to recognize them and by learning to name these automatic patterns of behavior, that's the first step to actually being able to introduce choice, control, and freedom over our response. Okay, and this is a fundamental lesson in EQ. So as I'm going through these, I'd love for you to think if you've recently observed these behaviors in people in your life. So sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself just for 1 second because for some reason my charger is not connecting. Just give me a little time here. There we go. Okay. All right. So you'll see the change in color because we actually use these exact slides in our talk for the chief residents. So fight, flight, freeze, and please. While I'm going through these, I'd love for you to just reflect on, have you recently observed this type of behavior in people in your life? And you can even turn that perspective onto yourself as well. Sometimes it's easier to notice things in others than it is in ourselves. So the first one is fight. The motivation here when we are met with a stressful stimulus is to attack and to defend. Okay. The underlying emotion is mainly anger. And what this can look like is, because, few of us, like I said, are slapping or punching or kicking, but you may observe people being very bullying, very controlling, and very judgmental. Okay. So this might present as arguments, as defending a position, like very, very stubbornly, as judging or criticizing one another, or even complaining. I'll give you guys an example. So in not my current place, but in the old hospital I worked at, we used to have this very interesting dynamic between the Department of Pulmonology, the lung doctors, and cardiology, the heart doctors, where sometimes we would consult both specialties because we had a patient that was having progressive difficulty breathing, just getting winded doing their normal daily activities. And if we couldn't figure out exactly what it was causing their shortness of breath, we may ask both specialties. And they would do this thing which we called chart wars, where cardiology would write a note saying, the heart is fine, there's nothing wrong with the heart, it's definitely a problem with the lungs. And then pulmonology would write a longer note saying, the lungs are perfectly fine, the cardiologists haven't tried hard enough to figure out what the diagnosis is. And then cardiology would write another note that was like even longer. And the crazy thing is they would never talk to each other. It was just this like proxy war that they had over the electronic health record. And this really was like, it was like a fight that you could see unfolding in front of your eyes. Okay. So flights, let's go to the next one. What does flight look like in the modern world? So the motivation here is to distance or avoid the stress, the stressful or the threatening stimulus. And here the emotion is actually avoided. You're trying not to feel anything because it feels so uncomfortable. It's distressing. What does flight look like in the modern world? So anything that is a distracting behavior can be considered a flight response. Okay, so in the extreme sense, drugs, alcohol, food, media, even work, even like really being throwing yourself into work as a way to distract yourself from the thing that might be bothering you. Examples of this are avoiding conversations, stuffing them away or suppressing them, ignoring, so like kind of like the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, and just saying, okay, back to work, saying whatever, I don't care, even if you do care. Let's go to freeze. Okay. So freeze. The thing happening here is indecision or paralysis, and the underlying emotion is anxiety or fear. Okay. And what this looks like is somebody who suddenly feels very indecisive, and in the extreme case might even look like panic or anxiety. Okay. In terms of examples, this can look like anxiously avoiding. It can seem similar to flight, but it has a different flavor. Okay. And the example that I like to use is that, for me, I often will have a team of 4 trainees that are different hierarchies that are taking care of patients along with me. And the medical student is at the bottom of the totem pole, like they're the most junior person on the team. So the day before, I might notice that my medical student is reading about something. They're reading about heart failure, let's say. And so the next morning on rounds, I'm like, oh, let me give this medical student an opportunity to show us, what did they learn yesterday? And so they can teach the rest of the team. So I know this medical student just looked this up. So I might say to them, oh, okay, Nita, Prashant, whatever their name is, like, why don't you tell us a little bit about heart failure? And immediately what will happen with the medical student, or I might ask them a question and they'll just say, I don't know. Like they literally just freeze. It's like a deer in headlights and they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, no, like take a breath. I know you know, because I literally saw you reading this 12 hours ago. And I know that what's happening for them is just a threat response. Okay, it's not it's just unconscious. The last one, please. So the motivation here is to submit and comply. And the underlying emotion that's running through here is actually a sense of shame, feeling like I'm not good enough, that I don't know as much as you do. People who are in this mode of thinking tend to be very self-critical. They might have a victim stance, like nothing, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to change anything. They might seem very passive, numbed out, and eventually resentful. So examples of this are kind of like, you might know people you've seen who are kind of like yes men or yes women, people who apologize a lot for no reason. I'm sorry, just tell me, oh, you're so smart, just tell me what I should do. What do you think is the right thing to do? Okay. So every one of us, for these 4 evolutionary responses to threat, which by the way, are meant to keep us alive in the jungle, but now we no longer live in a jungle. I want you to ask yourself, first of all, have you recently observed these unconscious reactions to stress in others? And have you noticed them in yourself? And where this comes from is, most of us will have either 1 or 2 patterns that we personally tend to be really good at, okay? And we learn this when we're young. So like sometimes some people grow up in families where yelling or arguing is effective. Like that's the way you get what you want. That's how you get your needs met. And so we become really good at that threat response. Others of us grow up in families where avoidance or submission is just like the easiest course of action. So just consider for yourself, which of these patterns do you think come most naturally to you? I want to make a point here, which is that at this point in the talk, many people say, well, okay, like I have an example of something that happened to me last week where, I decided that the best thing to do was just to leave the room. Like the person was being totally unreasonable and I couldn't even get them to hear what I was saying. And so I was like, I just left. And sure, like you could categorize that as a flight response, that it was an unconscious threat response, but actually no, like I chose to leave. Okay. So I just want to make the distinction here that behaviors in and of themselves can be unconscious or conscious. None of the behaviors in and of themselves are bad. It's fine to leave the interaction. It's fine to say, yes, I agree with you. You're totally right. I was wrong in that case. Like, that's fine. The question is, are you doing it consciously? Was it intentional? Or was it just a 40-second lizard brain response because you felt, I'm not safe? Okay. Okay. I'm going to leave you guys with a couple of quotes and then open it up to discussion. So the first one is, as human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world as in being able to remake ourselves. Can I ask, who knows who that quote is by? You can put it in the chat if you'd like. And the second one is one of my favorite quotes by Viktor Frankl. He's a Holocaust survivor, a psychiatrist, and a philosopher, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I recommend this book to anyone and everybody. And the quote is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. This is a world of emotional intelligence, okay, where we are living consciously and we're able to be in a place where we can make decisions that are creative, compassionate, connected, collaborative, all the things, like all of the qualities that our lizard brains never got to evolve to. Okay. So our goal here is to recognize when this is happening. It's to help create space between the stimulus and the response, and to move towards a more conscious response to stress, because all of us have stress all day long. And today's lesson is just a small one, but I think it's a really useful framework just to begin to start to understand ourselves and start to understand why how other people are acting and why they may be acting that way. I'd like to thank you guys, and I'll open it up to questions or comments. All right.
So please put on your
Anybody?
students, please put on your video. And I'm going to be taking pictures because we have a guest lecturer today. So I'll be taking pictures of the screen. It would be great to have you in video. Okay. I'll thank Dr. Patil. We are not ending, we are continuing with the discussion, but let me formally thank Dr. Patil for an excellent lecture. Thank you so much. I'll make one point. I grew up in Mumbai, or Bombay, as I like to call it. And I was a much more gregarious person before I became an engineer. Engineering, makes you work with inanimate objects, day in, day out for a number of hours. And you sort of lose that sense of EQ, or that you inherently may have. So engineering has that danger. So as you go through your engineering degree and even higher degrees, students, please be aware of this and don't lose that EQ. That does really decide how you fare well in your career, and especially as an entrepreneur, that's even more critical than just being an engineer all your life. And IITians, I know you want to be CEOs and not just engineers for your life. So EQ is very, very critical for you. We will open it up for questions. Thank you.
I think it'll be fine if people just go ahead and unmute and just ask the question, because I think it'll make it much more interpersonal. But, I can tell you the kind of situations or confrontation situations that I ran into during the early part of my career was that, when we would discuss things as a team, generally there is one or two people in the group that is what they call an alpha type, and they are very aggressive, and essentially they end up kind of dominating the discussion, or try to dominate the discussion. And the decision that ends up getting taken when that kind of discussion happens, where a alpha type essentially takes a very aggressively promotes their viewpoint, and I felt that I found it very hard to handle these alpha types in meetings. So any suggestion, Teja, how our students will definitely face this as soon as they start, as soon as they go into the real world, that there are these aggressive alpha types in any meeting, and or every meeting, unfortunately. And unless they can go ahead and come up with a way to deal and communicate and convince the team about the decisions process, they're going to feel frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that two things come to mind for me. So the first thing is that, you at this point, or, at some point, you had this insight about yourself, right? That you're like, this is challenging for me. That there is a particular phenotype of person that I feel, whatever word you want to use, I feel triggered by, I feel uncomfortable, I feel, I can't get my point across, I feel scared, shut down, whatever it is. So the first step is really having that self-awareness. of being like, oh, this is challenging for me. That's challenging for everyone, by the way. So there should be no self-judgment about it. Knowing this can actually be extremely impactful because it means that when you know you're going to have an interaction with that person, you come mentally prepared. Okay. And by mentally prepared, I mean you come literally like you have to regulate your own internal stress level before you have the interaction with the person, whenever you can, control it. Sometimes you don't know when it's going to happen. The second thing that also goes into self-awareness is then really starting to examine what is it that is making me so uncomfortable? Where is this coming from? Because at the end of the day, what you're describing here is it's an issue with boundaries, where you're feeling that somebody is overtaking and coming into your space and not allowing for your needs to be met. Many of us have trouble defending our boundaries. Okay. This is actually a skill that can be taught and can be practiced about how to deal kind of with the aggressive phenotype. And what I recommend is if you're somebody who has trouble speaking up or saying no or disagreeing, first of all, you got to know that about yourself. And the second thing is you got to start practicing doing it. So how do you do it? You start doing it in small stake situations. Okay. Start speaking up or saying no when it's not so scary. Okay. Maybe you're with a group of colleagues. Maybe it's not a boss that you're saying no to. Do it, play with it, think about it, see how it feels. And then you level up because nobody in this world is great at saying no that isn't like a jerk. Okay. So you have to practice because we were conditioned not to do it.
Yeah. And actually, as you become a man, go ahead. Somebody else has a question.
Yeah. Teja, it's thank you for this. And in my mind, I was thinking, for the entrepreneurs or for all of us and for all the students, we should imprint EQ in our mind, in our character. And each time each time we are in a meeting, in a group, like all the entrepreneurs, you have created a team, and now you are discussing some things, have that EQ imprinted, and so that you are able to listen to other, because other person has his own or her own point of view. So at that time, if you keep on thinking about the EQ, I think you will be bringing yourself in the center, and you'll be able to listen and probably come up with a better solution. That's one. And second, I just want to say that Teja's father, Dr. Suhas Patil, an IITian, and he's a good friend of mine. And so, he told me one day, he says, Ramesh, softness in today's world is considered as a weakness. Softness in today's world is considered. So when you make your point, make sure you say that with determination, with tenacity, and only then you'll be able to go and step up or make your point valid. Thank you, Teja. This is excellent. I'm truly I'm thinking about all this, even I think about 40 years ago, 45 years ago, and then even today, this EQ is so important, when I react to something, what my spouse says, when I react to something, what my child says, when I react to something, what my grandchild says. So thank you. I can appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that quote from Baba. I actually love that quote. That softness in today's world is seen as weakness. For me, it brings up this very important idea that today we were really talking about sort of the negative frames of emotional intelligence and of stress and survival and threat. The true value of working on EQ is if you're building a high functioning team, you want it to be a team that is truly working from values, like that they are doing work that is aligned with their values. And it really is like these things that they sound so cheesy, but they're not. It's like you're not going to find joy and meaning and professional fulfillment without connection. It's not going to happen. And connection really only happens in people who are curious about this stuff, you know, who want to connect with curiosity, creativity, compassion with one another. Like that's really like all of us are in school and at work looking for fulfillment, and IQ alone is not going to get us fulfillment.
So there are some questions in the chat box. I'll read the first one.
Great, thank you.
Abhishek, sure. So if we find any such stress behavior in ourselves, the solution would be to monitor ourselves and choose our action continuously.
Yes, to choose our action consciously. That's exactly right. So first of all, I want you to like really, I mean, you really have to practice some self-compassion here, because like I said, this is conditioned over millennia. And many of us, like 70% of our behavior is actually patterned unconscious reactions. That's just normal biology. If you notice this happening, yeah, name it, consider what happened. And, you know, even after the fact, then you can think, oh, how might I have reacted differently? That's how you start creating that space that Viktor Frankl is talking about. And over time, that space increases, it expands, and you're able to self-regulate enough to be like, okay, switching off lizard brain, using my prefrontal cortex. And, you know, it becomes more natural with time, of course.
There is a question by Mr. Rangarajan. Do you want to unmute and ask it yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I'm not able to switch on my video.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just a suggestion. In any group, this was more in response to what Professor Raj was saying during a discussion. Some may be very aggressive. So I felt that, you know, one should have a conviction in one's thought process and share the thought over an email if he is finding it very difficult to communicate it during the meeting. That was one. And be very assertive internally. Then over a period of time, one would be able to speak up. This is what was the thought I had. So I just wanted to have your view.
Right. No, this is a beautiful example. I think many of us have learned this mechanism of realizing that sometimes when we are uncomfortable managing the conflict one-on-one in the moment, that we can actually create space for the interaction. For basically, it's a way of stopping you from being overly reactive by putting your thoughts in writing, right? And what I would push you to do is to say that this is beautiful. This is a great way to deal with it, to put it into writing, because then you know yourself that you're saying your point clearly with conviction, like you said, with clarity. What I would push you to do is that over time, start getting comfortable doing it in person, in face-to-face, because you've got to start training your brain to deal with conflict.
Sure.
Thanks.
One by Aditya. Aditya, do you want to unmute and ask yourself?
Hello, good evening, sir. Good evening, Dr. Patil. It's such a pleasure having you. I have a small question, and the question is like the EQ. Once we enter into the corporate sector, we tend to understand that there is something which is EQ. Why not to learn the lessons right from the schooling days or the graduation days? Because once we step into our career, we realize that, man, we are absolutely lagging in EQ, and then we're somehow getting caught in the embarrassment or starting off with the wrong foot. So how to enhance the EQ skills right from the younger days and deal with those tough times at the corporate level? Thank you.
Yeah, your question is so good, because I think at the core of it, you're asking like, how can I minimize suffering for myself and for the people I'm going to end up working with? And, you know, I will say that school curricula are changing. You know, now there are like, you know, what I do for resilience in healthcare, it literally is making a curriculum so that students now don't have to suffer the way that I did. But here's what I would say to you is because this is a personal lesson that I've learned, is that, so my father is Suhas Patil. He's an engineer, he's a computer scientist, he's very, very logical, analytical. And I was raised in a home, just as I'm sure many of you were, where the priority was placed on math, science, like the tough technical skills. And that's what I spent years doing in medicine. What I realized looking back is any investment that I made in my liberal arts education is what has now paid back 1,000-fold for me today. So for me personally, when I was much younger, I used to do a lot of theater. When I was an undergrad, I was lucky that I got to minor in political science and I got to study abroad. When I was in medical school, I was again lucky. See, these things weren't intentional. I was just doing it because I was kind of interested at the time. Now, when I work in academic medicine, there's even more pressure to be like only like science, technical, like what are you publishing? Are you doing genetics research, etc.? What I'm realizing is that the pressure to be excellent technically just grows with time, but you have to have the presence of mind to realize that any investment you put into being curious about philosophy, about psychology, about human condition, about the human condition, whether it's literature, you know, like literally anything that is liberal arts, this is how you grow in your EQ. And this is how you learn the language of EQ, because you see how other people are talking about it.
Okay, there is one more by Vinay. Vinay, do you want to unmute and ask it yourself?
Yeah. So my question is how to deal with victim or entitled personalities.
Yeah, if you're working with somebody who has personality. Yeah, you know, I think that the first step is forgiveness, to be honest with you, is trying to put yourself in a state of mind where, you know, you really have the stance of this person is doing the best they can. Okay, like they are where they are meant to be, let's say. So you have to have some level of equipoise about how other people are showing up. Meaning like non-judgment, compassion for their circumstance. Secondly, you know, the thing is that it's important not to take responsibility for other people's behaviors and actions. So I think we could have like a days-long debate about how much what we do affects other people. But at the end of the day, you and I cannot actually control whether they still continue to have a victim personality or an entitled personality. What is within our control is how do we respond to their attitude, to that attitude, and how do we not allow it to poison the waters for ourselves? So I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but I would say, you know, be very mindful about what is it that you're trying to take responsibility for.
Dr. Patil, I have a question. We are hoping a lot of our students will go on to form global, you know, companies, or at least become CEOs, right? So do you want to comment on EQ and cultural differences across the globe?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one, you know, and I have to give a very general answer, which is that you have to cultivate humility and curiosity. Those two stances will serve you in life more than anything else because they will keep you learning, which is what will keep you happy. But no, you know, it's very tough to answer, you know, that big question about how to successfully run, you know, kind of a multinational corporation, except to say that, yeah, you have to be curious. You're just not going to know it all.
Thank you.
If I may, Raj, Dr. Teja, thank you so much for your inputs. Very, very interesting. I think the last comment of yours in terms of humility and curiosity. It's a constant learning process, and humility is the key to learning and deep learning. Number one, on self-awareness also. Sensitivity is another issue. In terms of a comment I just want to make, and I want to take off from where Ramesh Yadav had just mentioned about the learnings that he had from your father's comment. And I think in a leadership role, just imagine any of the students in this room going into a leadership role and handling a group where there is an alpha personality in the, as Raj mentioned earlier, Raj mentioned, alpha personality there, and now you are the leader. Okay, we are the leader. How do we are not the alpha, I assume. We're a very sensitive learning personality, and then one has to, as a leader, address this aggressive alpha team member. How does a leader handle the group that is a mix of various personalities, and this one alpha person as a leader? Shouldn't he or she then have to assert himself or herself as a leader? How does one handle this situation, Dr. Teja?
Yeah, I think that you have to ask yourself, like, how is that person serving the team? And really start with looking at it from both perspectives, because I think that a dangerous thing happens in team dynamic where once somebody is labeled as they're the aggressive one, they're the critical one, they're the negative one, is that we start to see only those things about that person, and they kind of get stuck in this kind of it's like an echo chamber. Like the person then does that behavior, we name that behavior, they feel they can only do that behavior. It's a very dangerous dynamic that a leader can unintentionally perpetuate. What I would push for in this situation is, one, taking a very, dispassionate inventory of what are those person's strengths. Like, what is really effective about that person? What are they bringing to the team that's actually helping? And then, it really is at that point, and this is not a single conversation, is starting to talk to the person about being like, hey, here are the things that are really working. Like, this is what makes you, what makes you better, And then shifting the conversation to being like, I want you to be effective in this work. And here are the things that are, holding you back from being as effective as you want. Because I think at the end of the day, anyone who's a real leader and is a real CEO, it's not about aggrandizing themselves. It's about empowering the team towards optimal performance. And I really think that if a CEO has that central value of being like, it's not about me, I'm trying to raise everybody else up, then people can sense, that you're coming from a place of truly just wanting the best, you're not going head to head in criticism. Again, how that person responds is not our responsibility. But, I think that kind of gets to, somebody had said earlier, it kind of gets to this idea of integrity, we are our best selves when what our actions and our words are aligned with our core values. And I think, if you're talking about values, people can't really debate values. You can only debate behaviors. Yes,
so
servant.
what we touched upon is servant leadership, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
So if I can add, curiosity and humility were the two words, that came about. If I can add empathy, friendliness, those will carry you a long way as entrepreneurs. The attitude to, how can I help you, or can I help you, will go a long way. And if we can tie in with the video that we saw earlier, Rob Milk said, you don't sell necessarily a product to the customer, you sell value and satisfaction to the customer. So that all comes from your EQ. And as entrepreneurs, it's very critical. And as budding engineers, it's very critical to balance EQ versus what you do as an engineer. How do you combine and make the most of it? I think Aditya, oh, he's clapping. I thought he had a question. Okay, sorry.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Oh, yeah, I think you're
Professor,
muted.
you need to
Professor Raj, you're on mute.
unmute.
So, going back to this alpha thing and, how they mess up the team dynamics to come to the right resolution for any issue or suggestion. One of the things that I learned was to set up the rules ahead of the meeting. So I set up the rules of the meeting where I said, okay, I would like, first of all, I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to talk for exactly 30 seconds or 1 minute about their point and just go around the room. And, so whether you have a very soft voice or whether you've got a loud voice, you still have only 30 seconds to communicate your point, and then you go to the next person and then you just run the meeting. So there are ways in which you can anticipate the fact that you need to get everybody to contribute, not just the person who's assertive, because ultimately the best answers are going to come when the whole team contributes, right? So there are ways by which you can set up the rules, and that's what the CEO does. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Teja, Dr. Patil. That is really a wonderful discussion and introduction for all of us. And it's always a refresher for me too. So I really appreciate, you pulling this time out of your schedule. Thank you very much.
Very great. I'm invited to do this. And yeah, I really wish a lot of success to all of the students here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patil.
Thank you, Teja.
For your time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ramesh. Mentors.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, Deepa.
Yes.
Yeah, you will get that email tomorrow morning. Okay.
Okay. Morning, I'll send it.
So Lalit, one quick question. Today we had the crib session this morning and nobody turned up. So there are only two possibilities that I can think of. One is nobody has anything to crib about, which is a great thing for us. Or other is everyone was busy with some class and that is why they could not turn. So what is the answer?
So similar to what Bhanu Pratap has done for 610, we can send email reminder saying that there is a deadline, and before that, students are requested to send their queries if there are any.
Deepa, can you do that?
No, that is a different thing. We have not arranged a crib session only for 610. We just said if any queries are there, just call
the same content, same email.
Lalit, hold on. We organized a crib session at 10:30 this morning. We were logged in for 1 hour.
Yes.
We told them that you can log into the link. Nobody showed up.
At least even nobody requested like I'm busy with this. I want to.
And nobody said I have another
that.
class. Can we do it another time? Nothing like that.
Right. Then I think from our side we have fulfilled our duties, but just to make sure that no one has any questions, so we can have this backup email saying that we have already conducted the crib session, we have waited there, but still if you were not able to join the crib session by some difficulty, so you can write down an email till say tomorrow evening or some sort of deadline.
Yeah, so Deepa, can you just send an email saying we conducted the crib session yesterday or whatever today, and if there are any queries, just let us know by tomorrow evening 5 p.m. If anyone missed out on it.
Yes, so we are freezing our marks, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Okay. Or 3 p.m.
Sure.
That is okay. And another will be that timing thing, so that you can